The ongoing conflict between Harvard University and the Trump administration has escalated dramatically with serious implications for the institution and its international student community. As the administration intensifies its scrutiny of higher education institutions, Harvard now faces the potential loss of its tax-exempt status and a ban on enrolling foreign students, a move that could reshape its academic environment and financial stability. In a recent series of demands, the White House has instructed Harvard to alter its hiring, admissions, and teaching practices as part of a broader effort to combat antisemitism on campus. The response from Harvard's president Alan Garber has been unequivocal, stating that the university will not surrender its independence or relinquish its constitutional rights. This defiance comes in the wake of a funding freeze that has already placed billions of dollars in federal support at risk, with the administration threatening further punitive measures. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem has demanded records related to what she termed the illegal and violent activities of foreign student visa holders, warning that failure to comply could strip Harvard of its ability to enroll international students. This is particularly concerning given that more than 27% of Harvard's enrollment comprises foreign students. The university has previously made concessions, including leadership changes in its Center for Middle Eastern Studies, but it has drawn a line at the latest demands. Adding to the pressure, former President Trump has publicly criticized Harvard, claiming it no longer deserves its status as a premier educational institution. "Harvard is a joke, teaches hate and stupidity, and should no longer receive federal funds," he posted on his social media platform, underlining a growing sentiment among some political factions that view universities as bastions of liberal ideology hostile to conservative values. This rhetoric reflects a broader trend, as polling by Gallup indicates declining confidence in higher education across the political spectrum, particularly among Republicans. The administration's stance on Harvard is not an isolated incident but part of a larger initiative targeting over 60 universities identified by its anti-Semitism task force for review. This campaign has raised alarms among educators and advocates who fear it could stifle academic freedom and discourage international collaboration. Columbia University, for example, recently capitulated to similar pressures, agreeing to several demands after federal funding was threatened. As tensions mount, the implications for Harvard and its international student population could be profound. The potential ban on foreign students would not only diminish the university's cultural diversity but also impact its financial health. Given that international students contribute significantly to tuition revenues, the ongoing saga illustrates a critical juncture for higher education in the United States, where the interplay between political pressures and institutional autonomy is being tested. Looking ahead, the situation remains fluid. Harvard's commitment to maintaining its independence may galvanize support from academic institutions nationwide, but the administration's willingness to follow through on its threats raises significant questions about the future of international education in America. As this conflict unfolds, observers will be keenly watching for developments that could affect not only Harvard but also the broader landscape of U.S. higher education and its role as a sanctuary for intellectual pursuit and diversity. In a world where political maneuvering often shapes international relations, recent developments in U.S. foreign policy highlight the complexities of Donald Trump's administration, as tensions rise between the U.S. and its allies. Particularly in the context of tariffs and military costs, the implications of these negotiations extend beyond economics, potentially affecting the geopolitical landscape. On April 17, 2025, President Trump engaged in tariff talks with Japan, marking a crucial moment in his administration's approach to international trade. In a meeting that underscored both admiration and frustration, Trump acknowledged Japan's historical significance in U.S. trade relations while simultaneously imposing substantial tariffs on Japanese goods. The president remarked on social media, "A great honor to have just met with the Japanese delegation on trade. Big progress." This statement reflects a dual narrative, one that seeks cooperation while maintaining a hardline stance on trade practices. The negotiations also brought a notable shift in Trump's rhetoric regarding U.S. military presence in Japan. as he included the costs of troop deployment in discussions about tariffs. This move signals an attempt to bolster economic contributions from allies, suggesting that Japan might need to increase its financial support for the 50,000 U.S. military personnel stationed there. Such a strategy could redefine the security dynamics in the region, prompting other allies to reconsider their commitments to the U.S. military presence. While Trump's administration navigates these trade discussions, the former president faced criticism from notable figures including Barack Obama. In response to the Trump administration's freeze of $2.2 billion in federal funding to Harvard University, Obama praised the institution's decision to resist the administration's demands to implement controversial policies. "Harvard has set an example for other higher ed institutions," Obama stated, underscoring the importance of academic freedom amidst political pressure. The freeze was part of a broader effort by the Trump administration to address perceived antisemitism on college campuses, further complicating the relationship between educational institutions and federal funding. The tension between Trump's policies and the responses from academic and international communities highlights an ongoing battle over the definitions of free speech and academic freedom. As the administration intensifies its scrutiny of universities, the implications for academic discourse and student safety become increasingly pronounced, prompting a re-evaluation of academic autonomy in the face of federal oversight. The ongoing tariff negotiations with Japan, combined with the administration's broader approach to funding and free speech, signal a transformative period in U.S. foreign policy. As Trump pushes for concessions from allies, the potential for reshaping long-standing agreements looms large. The intertwining of economic and military strategies may set a precedent for future discussions with other nations, raising questions about the sustainability of such an approach. Looking ahead, the implications of these developments will likely unfold as the administration continues to navigate its complex relationships with both allies and domestic institutions. As Trump's policies provoke responses from various sectors, the potential for increased friction in international relations remains high, suggesting that the coming months will be critical in determining the future of U.S. foreign policy and its impact on global alliances. The balance between economic demands and diplomatic relations will be a defining factor in shaping the geopolitical landscape in the years to come. In a dramatic escalation of tensions between the Trump administration and one of the nation's most prestigious universities. The Internal Revenue Service (IRS) is reportedly considering revoking Harvard University's tax-exempt status. This move aligns with a broader campaign initiated by President Trump, who has publicly criticized the university for its perceived liberal bias and its handling of issues related to antisemitism on campus. According to sources cited by the New York Times, the Treasury Department has instructed the IRS to examine the possibility of rescinding Harvard's tax exemption, a step that could significantly impact the institution's finances. The potential loss of this status could cost Harvard millions of dollars annually, a consideration that adds urgency to the ongoing discussions. President Trump took to social media stating Harvard can no longer be considered even a decent place of learning, and labeled the institution a joke that teaches hate and stupidity. This targeted approach against Harvard reflects a broader strategy by the Trump administration to exert control over higher education institutions, which they accuse of fostering an environment hostile to conservative viewpoints. Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem has also threatened to bar Harvard from enrolling foreign students unless it complies with demands for information regarding the activities of its foreign student visa holders. This threat compounds the financial stakes for the university, as international students comprise over 27% of its enrollment, contributing significantly to its revenue. Harvard President Alan Garber, in a robust defense of the university's autonomy, has rejected the administration's sweeping demands. The university will not surrender its independence or relinquish its constitutional rights, he stated, asserting that Harvard has already taken several steps to address concerns related to antisemitism. The university's stance underscores a commitment to academic freedom and the protection of its institutional integrity, even in the face of federal pressure. The implications of these developments extend beyond Harvard. The administration's actions against the university are part of a larger campaign targeting at least 60 institutions identified by the government's antisemitism task force. This reflects a growing sentiment among some lawmakers and segments of the public, particularly among conservatives who believe that universities are increasingly biased against conservative perspectives. Polling data from Gallup indicates that trust in higher education has been waning, particularly among Republicans, who feel that universities promote a political agenda at odds with their values. The situation is further complicated by the precedent set earlier this year when Columbia University agreed to several of the administration's demands after facing a significant federal funding freeze. This included changes in leadership within its Middle Eastern Studies program, highlighting the potential consequences of non-compliance for institutions dependent on federal support. As Harvard stands firm against the administration's demands, the university's future remains uncertain. The repercussions of this standoff could reshape the landscape of higher education governance in the United States, possibly paving the way for a more adversarial relationship between the government and educational institutions. Looking ahead, it remains to be seen how universities across the nation will navigate the pressures being exerted by the federal government and whether they will stand by their principles or bend to the demands of political power. The outcome of this conflict may well set a precedent for how academic independence is maintained in the face of governmental scrutiny. In a rapidly changing global economic landscape, the ramifications of President Donald Trump's recent tariff policies are sending shockwaves through financial markets and trade relations. As the president's administration imposes sweeping tariffs on imports, economists, political leaders, and international organizations express growing concerns over their impact on both the U.S. economy and global trade dynamics. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell did not mince words when he addressed the implications of the new tariffs, which he described as significantly larger than anticipated. In a stark warning, Powell highlighted that the measures are likely to result in higher inflation and slower growth, reflecting a sharp decline in consumer and business sentiment regarding economic stability. The tariffs, which include a sweeping 10% tax on most imported goods and a staggering 145% on certain Chinese products, have already led to considerable volatility in the stock markets, with the Dow Jones Industrial Average experiencing a 1.73% drop and the S&P 500 and Nasdaq falling by 2.24% and 3.07% respectively. The World Trade Organization (WTO) has also weighed in, projecting a 0.2% decline in merchandise trade for the year as a consequence of Trump's aggressive tariff strategy. WTO Director General Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala warned that the ongoing U.S.-China trade war could risk dragging the global economy into recession, emphasizing the potential for geopolitical fragmentation that would further destabilize international trade relations. The new estimate for 2025 is almost 3 percentage points lower than what it would have been without the recent changes, she stated, underscoring the breadth of the economic fallout. In a bold response to the economic chaos, California Governor Gavin Newsom has filed a lawsuit challenging Trump's authority to enact these tariffs. Newsom's legal action argues that the president's unilateral imposition of tariffs under the International Economic Emergency Powers Act is not only unlawful but also inflicting significant harm on the state's economy. California, as the largest state economy in the U.S. and a global leader in trade, stands to suffer immensely from the tariff policies, which have already disrupted supply chains and raised costs for consumers and businesses alike. "We're standing up for American families who can't afford to let the chaos continue," Newsom asserted. The growing chorus of opposition to these tariffs includes voices from both sides of the political aisle. Senator Rand Paul, Republican Kentucky, emphasized that tariffs represent a tax on American consumers, while Senator Lisa Murkowski, Republican Alaska, cautioned against allowing one individual to wield such unilateral power over trade policy. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce and National Retail Federation have echoed these sentiments, warning that the tariffs could lead to substantial losses in consumer spending power, estimated to range between $46 billion and $78 billion annually. As the trade war escalates, the implications extend beyond U.S. borders. The International Monetary Fund (IMF) and World Bank have both issued warnings about the potential for increased instability in the global economy. World Bank President Ajay Banga called for nations to engage in dialogue to resolve trade tensions and avert further economic fallout. Increased uncertainty and economic instability will weigh on the global economy, he noted, urging countries to strengthen bilateral and regional ties as alternatives to trade with the U.S. In the midst of these tumultuous developments, Powell reiterated the Fed's commitment to monitoring the situation closely. He acknowledged the dual mandate of maintaining maximum employment and price stability faces new challenges as the economic landscape shifts. For the time being, we are well positioned to wait for greater clarity before considering any adjustments to our policy stance, he said, hinting that the Fed may take a cautious approach in light of rising inflation expectations linked to the tariffs. As the future unfolds, the economic climate remains fraught with uncertainty. The continued imposition of tariffs and the U.S. administration's unpredictable trade policies are likely to provoke further reactions from both domestic and international stakeholders. The evolving situation demands careful attention as it could reshape not only U.S. economic policy but also the broader global trade framework with far-reaching consequences for businesses and consumers alike. In a significant shift in U.S. military policy, concerns are mounting over President Donald Trump's increasing domestic military use, particularly his speculated invocation of the Insurrection Act. This act could enable him to federalize National Guard troops for deployment within the United States, a move that many civil liberties advocates, including the American Civil Liberties Union (ACLU), view as both unprecedented and deeply troubling. On April 16, 2025, Hina Shamsi, director of the ACLU National Security Project, voiced alarm over Trump's recent memorandum titled "Military Mission for Sealing the Southern Border of the United States and Repelling Invasions." This directive raises significant questions about the appropriate role of the military on domestic soil, particularly considering the historical context of military engagement in civilian affairs. Make no mistake, if Trump invokes the Insurrection Act to activate federalized troops for mass deportation, whether at the border or somewhere else in the country, it would be unprecedented, unnecessary, and wrong, Shamsi stated. The potential use of federal troops domestically is rooted in a complex legal framework. The Posse Comitatus Act of 1878 restricts the use of federal military forces for domestic law enforcement. Underscoring a critical constitutional principle, the military should not police civilians. Shamsi highlighted that the Founding Fathers were deeply concerned about the dangers of a standing army and emphasized the importance of civilian control over military actions. This principle remains vital today as the military's domestic role is traditionally limited to extreme situations such as enforcing federal law when civilian agencies are incapacitated. Currently, Trump's military deployments have primarily supported border operations, but his recent actions could significantly alter that dynamic. Following his Inauguration Day declaration of a national emergency at the southern border, Trump has ramped up the presence of federalized National Guard troops. These troops have been involved in various operational roles, including monitoring and logistical support for border enforcement agencies, exacerbating tensions in border communities already grappling with aggressive federal policing and surveillance. The ACLU's concerns are compounded by Trump's latest memorandum, which expands military jurisdiction over public civilian lands along the border. This directive opens the door for military activities that could encroach upon the daily lives of residents in border towns such as San Diego and El Paso. Shamsi warned that such expansions could lead to increased federal prosecutions for trespassing, creating an atmosphere of fear and uncertainty among civilians. While Trump has not yet invoked the Insurrection Act, his administration's rhetoric and actions suggest a troubling trend towards militarization of domestic policy. The ACLU is calling on Congress to provide oversight on these actions, emphasizing the need for safeguards to protect civil liberties in border regions. In the realm of national defense, Trump is also pursuing an ambitious plan to develop a U.S. missile defense system modeled after Israel's Iron Dome. The Pentagon is reportedly preparing to brief Trump on various options for this initiative. dubbed the Golden Dome. This system aims to enhance U.S. capabilities to intercept a wide array of threats including missiles and drones, and is being compared to the Strategic Defense Initiative proposed by former President Ronald Reagan. As Trump seeks to realize his vision of a fortified national defense, experts caution that the financial and technological challenges are substantial. Costs for the Golden Dome could reach hundreds of billions of dollars, with the most modest plans estimated at around $10 billion. The timeline for implementation is also uncertain, with some officials predicting it could take 5 to 7 years to fully operationalize an effective air defense system. In parallel, U.S. allies are similarly responding to Trump's pressure for increased military spending. Reports indicate that at least one allied nation has announced plans to bolster its military expenditures. Reflecting the broader geopolitical landscape influenced by the Trump administration's national security strategies. As these developments unfold, they raise critical questions about the balance between national security and civil liberties, as well as the implications of militarizing domestic policies. The ACLU's advocacy underscores the importance of ensuring that military actions remain consistent with constitutional principles, particularly as the possibility of invoking the Insurrection Act looms on the horizon. The coming months will be pivotal in determining the trajectory of both domestic military use and the broader national defense strategy under Trump's administration. In a surprising turn of events, President Donald Trump has recently opted for diplomacy over military action concerning Iran's nuclear ambitions, a decision that has significant implications for U.S.-Israeli relations and the broader geopolitical landscape. Just weeks ago, Israel had laid out plans for a military strike aimed at Iranian nuclear facilities, with expectations of U.S. support to bolster their mission. However, as discussions within the Trump administration intensified, divisions emerged that ultimately led to Trump's decision to halt the planned strike. According to administration officials and others privy to the discussions, Trump's choice reflects a broader debate within his cabinet regarding the efficacy of military intervention versus diplomatic engagement. Historically, key figures in the U.S. government have favored a hawkish stance toward Iran, especially in light of its ongoing nuclear developments. Yet a faction within the administration expressed skepticism about whether an airstrike could truly dismantle Iran's nuclear capabilities without inciting a larger conflict. This internal conflict culminated in a rough consensus against immediate military action, particularly as Iran demonstrated a willingness to negotiate. Israeli officials had initially prepared for a potential strike as early as next month, with military plans that included both commando raids and extensive bombing campaigns. The objective was to delay Iran's nuclear capabilities by at least a year. Such operations would have required significant U.S. involvement, not just for execution but also to safeguard Israel from inevitable Iranian retaliation. However, Trump informed Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of his decision to pursue diplomatic talks with Tehran, instead marking a notable shift from his previous administration's more confrontational approaches. In a recent meeting in the Oval Office, Trump conveyed to Netanyahu that any military strikes would be postponed while negotiations progressed. Netanyahu's subsequent public statements indicated his concerns, emphasizing that any deal must allow for decisive action against Iran's nuclear infrastructure. An agreement with Iran will work only if it allows the signers to go and blow up the facilities, dismantle all the equipment under American supervision with American execution, he declared. This diplomatic pivot follows a series of setbacks for Iran, including the inefficacy of its missile strikes against Israel and the decimation of Hezbollah forces, its key ally in the region. These developments had initially bolstered Israeli confidence in a military solution. However, with U.S. officials like General Michael E. Kurilla of U.S. Central Command and National Security Advisor Mike Waltz initially expressing openness to Israeli plans, the tide turned as concerns about escalating military conflict grew. The debate within the Trump administration was not limited to military strategy, it also reflected a strategic re-evaluation of U.S. objectives in the Middle East. National Intelligence Director Tulsi Gabbard warned that the buildup of American military assets could provoke a wider conflict, an outcome the administration sought to avoid. Even figures known for their hawkish views began to reconsider the implications of a military strike, suggesting a shift toward a more cautious approach. As discussions continue, the Trump administration faces a complex landscape of options for engaging with Iran. While some officials advocate for a renewed focus on diplomacy, others caution against the risks of any agreement that might allow Iran to advance its nuclear capabilities. The mixed signals emanating from Washington indicate a critical juncture wherein the administration must balance its historical commitment to Israel's security with the necessity of avoiding another costly military engagement in the Middle East. In conclusion, Trump's decision to prioritize dialogue over direct military action represents a significant shift in U.S. foreign policy toward Iran. As negotiations unfold, the administration's challenge will be to navigate the intricate dynamics of Middle Eastern geopolitics while addressing both Israeli security concerns and the potential risks of Iranian nuclear proliferation. The outcome of these discussions could redefine U.S.-Iran relations and influence the stability of the region for years to come.